But in seeing like the way that the rules are spun, right, to just kind of like let you get away with certain things that are, to me, like morally repugnant, right? Like, you might not feel that way if you're a Muslim, but the idea that you're taking another wife for convenience, you know what I mean? That you're just going to see her in a hotel, that just seems like an out to me.
The rule is one man, one woman,
Right,
for life.
right.
And that is the standard. And you have to be a one-woman man in order to be a leader of a New Testament church. Why?
Right.
Because monogamy is the standard for Christian behavior. And so
The idea, which I found fascinating, that the principle is completely different. One operates on love, other operates on control. So when you have this element of love going through, and of course it depends on like how solid of a connection you have with your loving God, right? And that keeps you away from any immorality.
Islam will continue to be triumphant until there have been 12 Khulafa, all of them from Al-Quraysh.
The God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed. Nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. It shall break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever.
This is my brother, my executor, and my successor among you, so listen to him and obey.
My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting.
Whoso obeys me obeys God. Whoever disobeys me disobeys God. Whoever disobeys my commander disobeys me.
The Lord said to me, You are my son. Today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will make the nations your heritage, and the ends of the earth your possession.
Two systems of government, two visions for life on earth. Whichever is true changes everything. This is Christ and Khulafa.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Christ and Caliphate. On this podcast, we talk about issues in the modern world as they relate to Christianity and Islam, religion, worldview, and politics. And we also talk about timeless principles behind those things as well. So today, we are talking about a recent scandal that is blowing up on the sort of Christianity and Islam Twitter space, because a well-known Islamic Dawah guy named Muhammad Hijab has been accused of secretly taking a second wife and then just sort of discarding her, basically treating her like a slave. What have you guys seen on this?
I mean, I watched the video from, was it Behind Veils? The there's a YouTube channel, and the guy who presented the allegation has a YouTube channel called Behind Veils, and he goes through, like, walks through their attempts to contact him about the allegations being made, and then he's really like focused on giving the person, who's being silenced, a platform to speak, right? So he allows for, I don't know, it's like a 10-minute, almost 10 minutes worth of this woman's recorded testimony to explain her side of what happened. So she lays out all of the allegations and all of the things, and that she said happened, which are honestly kind of scandalous, right? Like, that he wooed her, that he lied to her, that he told her he was gonna, take her as a second wife and then make it okay with her family. And, he dropped her at one point before they said they would get married, and he came back and, kind of tried to reel her back in. And then after, she looked at this man who's supposed to be this like titan, Islamic titan, as far as like his scholarly prowess and his wisdom and his integrity and all of these other things. And then, he changed the deal on her, right? He said, I'm not going to pay, I'm not going to provide for you. You're essentially going to be what they call a hotel wife, right? Like, I'll meet up with you in a hotel every once in a while, and that's it. So no explanation to her family. So she feels like the entire thing was very predatory, um, and she obviously feels like she was the harmed party in all of it because it cost her her opportunity to marry somebody else, her integrity is being called into question, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and we also both watched the response video that Mohammed Hijab put out, or at least he didn't put it out directly. There was a new YouTube channel created exclusively for this sort of response video. It was just called False Accusations with a Response Video. So we all watched that as well.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important for us, whatever we're going to talk about today, that we are still in the mindset of all the facts have not come out yet.
Sure.
So if this was a private, affair between people, this would be, this would be a gossip situation. But the reality is, this is like blowing up.
Yeah.
This is something we want to help people think through biblically, and this is something that needs to be addressed. This is not happening in a corner. We're not blowing up something that is happening quietly.
Right. It's a big deal in Islamic scholar space, and it's a big deal, becoming a big deal on X and social media,
I think
YouTube and
it's
stuff.
a scandal, right? So whenever there is a scandal and it comes to limelight, then it becomes a hot topic of the town. Essentially, it's gossiping. What I see is, we do not know every single fact about it. There is no legal proceeding has been processed, or there is no a verdict from the court or any legal documentation to prove the legitimacy of either the accusation or the defense, right? So I think it's because it's a hot topic. That's why we are talking about it,
I
right?
mean, the whole thing kind of reminds me of, when I grew up in Trenton, New Jersey, right? So it's like not quite in the hood, but like one click from the hood, and it's just the whole thing reminds me of like hood drama, right? Like she said, and he was with this baby mama and all this other crazy stuff, and people, say he said, she said, and look, I got texts, I got receipts, and I got this, and everyone's got their own, and then everyone kind of breaks off and splinters off into, I'm gonna be with the accuser, I'm gonna be with the,
Yeah, pick a side.
right, you know what I mean? Like it just kind of splinters and turns factional and happens within, neighbors and families and all this other stuff. So just in the way of observing how this is developing, I don't want to diminish what they're going through and any pain that anyone's experiencing or whatever, right? It just, it seems like a very very clannish response, right? Like we're going to double down and protect our people, um, we're gonna speak up for the oppressed, you know what I mean? And everyone's got their reasons to kind of jump in front
Yeah,
of
and on top of that, I think it is a common knowledge that the world tends to side with innocent, which look innocent at least, given
sure,
in this situation the woman that is being offered or like given promises or whatnot,
right?
and without going into details
Yes,
of like what exactly happened, we all sided with that woman for the reason that she is accused in hijab for whatever the things are. So
sure,
it's a natural tendency. It happens. It happens with every global dynamic, political dynamic,
sure.
even it's Palestine, Israel, or it's Bermuda, or in Vietnam, or wherever. So that's a common thing in our human nature, I believe.
So one thing I will say, like weighing up the evidence here, reading his rebuttal on this, his rebuttal doesn't seem to be this didn't happen. If he's actually saying this didn't happen at all, he should probably say that more clearly than he is,
Right.
because that was not clear from the response video. What the response video seems to be arguing from the evidence is that he said ahead of time, these type of Misyar marriages are permissible, but this isn't going to be a good thing for you. You're not going to feel like you're treated equally. And it was trying to imply that she knew all that, like ahead of time.
Mm-hmm.
Just not seeming to imply that it didn't happen. It's seeming to imply that she knew what she was getting into and then regretted it. Like that seems to be what his argument is in the rebuttal video.
You're on a pretty legit ground, if we're going back to Islamic theology or Islamic jurisprudence. These misyar is something that you can do. It's allowed, and if both parties agree, on certain set of rules, then I think as a third person, I personally think we can just comment on it without saying, no, this is bad. But yeah, if we bring our principles, then it's a completely different story, right?
Yeah. So there's lots of that. That seems to be what I can tell what the argument is over. It's not whether this happened or not. It's whether she was in on the situation ahead of time and regretted it later, or whether she was kind of blindsided with the situation.
I mean, some of the vibe I got was first in the beginning of the rebuttal video, it starts to say like, oh, she's just a very deranged person who was like kind of stalking him and, obsessed with him and all this other stuff. And then it does kind of shift into, well, even if it was true, right? Look at how crazy she is. You know what I mean? There's a lot of deflection going on in the response. It's funny because it reminds me of like the tone of all of it reminds me of in like the Lord of the Rings movie Return of the King when they go to the Black Gate and there's this guy just like comes out of he's the guy with all teeth, right? And he's just speaking like so kind of with like an arrogance to it. You know what I mean? And that's the vibe I got like how dare they accuse us, right? Like look at how smart we are. Look at how, like it took like a very like diminishing tone to it, but I mean that's maybe that's production, maybe that's how it actually sounded, but that was just me.
So the thing is, whether this turns out to be true or not, and to what degree it ends up being true, one thing you can't call Mohammed Hijab here would be a hypocrite, because he actively publicly advocates for this kind of thing.
Yes.
Which is insane.
Yeah.
Right.
So there's a podcast with Ali Dawah, some other men, and 3 or 4 Muslim women, where he's making the direct argument that if you take a second wife, you do not need to tell your first wife you're taking a second wife.
That is pretty legit.
And he's also making the argument that you don't actually have to treat your wives equally as long as they agree not to be treated equally beforehand.
Okay, so there is a problem with this pretty phrase, right? Equal. We have to define equal. What does equal means? Yes, going to Islamic sources, Islam explicitly say that you have to provide for them equally, right? Give them food, shelter, all those things equally. But spending time loving someone more than the other, that is your it's on you. If you like, for example, Muhammad openly say that I liked Aisha more than other wives.
Right.
So it is evident from there. So I don't think that Muhammad Hijab was wrong when he made those comments. Of course, I completely disagree with what he says.
I was listening to the back and forth, right? This is why I'm not a Muslim. This is exactly why I'm not a Muslim. It's just everything I've ever seen from this guy just seems like he's got like a self-righteous, like kind of, I'm, definitely right attitude in a lot of the things that he says that, and tries to shut down like debate and all this other stuff. I mean, I don't want to like throw out accusations, but I feel like it's just like, this is why narcissists shouldn't marry each other. Right. Like, but I'm not saying she's a narcissist either. I'm not saying he's a narcissist, but there's definitely some stuff there. But in seeing like the way that the rules are spun, right, to just kind of like let you get away with certain things that are to me like morally repugnant, right? Like, you might not feel that way if you're a Muslim, but the idea that you're taking another wife for convenience, you know what I mean? That you're just going to see her in a hotel, that just seems like an out to me, right? It seems like a way out. And of course, we may address this later on, but the point to me is like, I'm looking at this and I'm just seeing like hubris, right? And whether or not she went along with it is a different story. She may very well have done that. And, they both claim to have evidence. But I just feel like, gosh, this whole thing is like it reminded me of like when I was growing up watching Muslims, walk out of prayer and then just start tearing each other apart verbally or something like that. Like it was definitely, reminded me of like, I did not, this is why I left Islam.
So this is exactly what Jesus is talking about when he goes so hard after the religious scholars of his day.
Right.
The people who are technically obeying the rules they have set out for themselves. But that's exactly it. They are rules they have set out for themselves rather than God's law. And Jesus says, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees. Scribes being like the scholars, Pharisees being like the Dawah guys, right? Woe to you, hypocrites, for you tithe mint and dill and cumin and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness. These you ought to have done without neglecting the others. You blind guides, straining out a gnat and swallowing a camel. The illustration there is like they're trying so hard to get this tiny speck out of their drink, then they swallow an entire camel as they drink their tea, right?
Yes.
And that's exactly what this is here, right? They're so precise with all these rules, and these precise rules allow somebody to arrange a marriage that has no financial obligations and is just meeting in a hotel for sex. Now, again, whether or not that actually happened here, that's what's being argued for by people.
Yeah, I think there's two things I would say. First, going back to Ivar's when he talked about Muhammad hijab and Islam, I would say Muhammad hijab is not Islam. He is representing it.
Yes,
Right.
of course. I would
So
never.
just for
I'm
the-
not saying that.
Yeah,
right?
political correctness. right?
Obviously, my uncles and my aunts and my mother don't behave that way.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not indicative of Islam. It's indicative of him.
Yes, one
Yes.
particular case. And coming back to your comment, of course, when we see it from biblical lens, how Jesus talked about it, and looking back to what Islamic theology or what Islamic structure looked like when it comes to polygamy. So there are always it all depends on which Islamic practice you are looking at. Right? In the United States, we heard a lot of scholars strongly disagree with this notion of like, no, you cannot take a second wife unless there is certain issues, right? That's the common practice. But if you go to Pakistan, the scenario is different. Go to Saudi Arabia, it's a completely different story. So I think the roots are there for sure, right? That gives you freedom because Muhammad himself, that's a sunnah.
Sure.
He married multiple wives, and you can do that too. But that gives so much of freedom to people who can exploit on those things, So that is what actually Muhammad hijab is doing, and many of his likes are doing so.
I mean,
allegedly.
he said something. The video that laid out the allegations had a clip of him talking about like how he married somebody and he facilitated a marriage in 1 minute and 60 seconds. Right. So I would say that regardless of whatever like the texts say, like the spirit of the text was never, and you can marry somebody in 1 minute and 60 seconds. And we should just keep that going within a system forever and ever and ever. We should make that okay, that we can marry and divorce that quickly.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like in what we've read of the Quran, I've never seen that. Like I've never seen that it was just, oh, I don't want her anymore, or I want her and I can have her and I can take her in 1 minute. Now I understand like if you were to prosecute the idea legally, and say, how do I get to this point? And whether or not it is or isn't permitted, sure, it doesn't necessarily say you can't do those things either. But, this is why context is important, right? Like, I don't think that, the Sahaba would have been like, this is a good idea, right? Or that they practice those things themselves. This is the evolution of an idea, right? That kind of leads you to like, regardless of whatever the Misyar says, this is how he views it, and this is how he does those things.
It comes down to his own
Right.
personal implementation.
Yeah, right. And then on top of that, like people respect him and follow him and, look up to the things he says and all this other stuff. So platform plays a big part, right? Platform plays a big part. YouTube followers, like the power of, the podium, I guess you would say. play a big part in your ability to influence people to do these things.
And scholars are role models in Islamic
Yeah,
hierarchy.
sure.
If you look at prophets, sahabas, and then the carriers of that messages are those scholars or ulama, right? So there is a huge emphasis and a sense of respect. People follow them blindly,
Right.
and that is the problem, right?
Yeah.
So,
Well, it's indicative of a bigger problem, right? But then it filters its way down into like, I like her, I married her, and she outlived her usefulness, and now she's gone, right? Like, or she crazy.
So let's move on beyond the specific issue and let's talk about Misyar marriages in general. So this is actually a term I didn't really know until yesterday. Is this something you grew up hearing about, or is this kind of a new thing, or what's the deal here?
okay, so it is. There's a lot of things to talk about when we consider misyar. I must say I have not grew up hearing this term a lot, but I come from a society where I heard about Shia's muta, right? And misyar is, if not similar, is kind of close to muta.
Okay, so you're saying there's a Shia concept that is similar to that.
Okay, imagine someone doesn't watching the show doesn't know what mutta is. Explain mutta.
Right.
Muta is short-term marriage, like contract-based marriage for say 1 to 3 days. It can be for hours, but of course, muta is not just simply 2 hours sex permit, right? It comes with certain rules and regulations. It is practiced in Iran in modern day. Yes, it is practiced, but it has, of course, the legal proceedings to muta. It's not a common practice, and the why in Sunni Islam it is not considered a common practice or not considered for a long, long time because it can be exploited, right? So let me go back and tell you why muta was invented at first place, or introduced, I would say, not invented, introduced at first place. So the reason was that if you're a traveler or sojourner going somewhere else, and there is a chance that you will indulge yourself into extramarital activities outside with the woman that is not permissible. So God gave you a room or space because, of course, men and their shahwa, that's what they call the desire. So to calm your desire, that is a permit.
It's a much nicer word than lust. It sounds so much better.
You'll try to keep it within the boundaries of niceness. So yeah, with that you can get a permit and have a wife for a particular, and that's part of the agreement. It is mentioned in the agreement that this marriage going to hold for this much amount of period, right? Again, I do not know every single thing about muta, but this is what muta generally looks like. And then now coming back to Sunni Islam, the Sunni Islam version is misyar, if I'm not wrong. So misyar is kind of similar principle, but as growing up as a Sunni Muslim, I never heard of that. It's a modern modern thing that has been introduced by these.
The first place I ever saw this concept was in Rami season 1.
Okay.
Right. The beginning of Rami season 1, he's like out on a date with a girl, and they're, doing some heavy petting and making out in the car, and she's like, they want to have sex, but they're like, do we need to call the imam and have like a quickie marriage and a quickie and I was like, I've never seen that before. So I mean, I've heard obviously about it taking multiple wives, right? But not the
permit one, right?
Just going with like a 24-hour like turnaround, right? Like
yeah.
So it's really important at a moment like this that Muhammad Hijab is justifying misyar marriages. He's actively encouraging them.
Sure.
Right. That's indisputable. That's documentable at this point. But you cannot take that as a representation of all Islam.
Mm-hmm.
There are lots of conscientious people who are categorically against this. And see this kind of the way we would see this, right?
Yeah, and they have their arguments from Quran and from Hadith and from Islamic history as well. That in certain cases, as I mentioned, muta was introduced for certain occasions, special occasions. It's not a day-to-day life thing. You just and the next day you're going to Leavenworth or you're going to California and you feel like you want to have a quick session, and then you go and find a girl and do a Misyar, and that's how you do it. No, it wasn't. So it was mainly you going out to the war and you're spending there 5 to 6 months or a couple of years there. That's where. So that's Islamic justification, I would say.
And to be fair, if you're going to war in the Islamic justifications, you kind of don't need a temporary marriage for that kind of thing. But that is a topic for another day.
Yeah, right.
Because there is, back in Muhammad's time and early on, there is the concubine.
The concept of
Right,
concubine.
the concept
Yes.
of concubine as well. So in some ways, that does not exist in the modern Muslim world, really. Does it?
Again, that there is a lot of history that we got to go through to understand this completely. But I would say, on the face of it, is if you're sent as a governor or you're sent as an official position holder to a remote place, say Khorasan, right, and you're far from your wife and kids, so you can have the luxury of having a marriage based on misyar, where you're just giving her nanu nafka and then like taking her as temporary wife.
So these are kind of things that are on the.
Why would you want more than? I'm sorry.
I have disagreements, bro.
I can't even imagine having more than one. That's
Me too.
yeah. Oof, man.
There are basically these things that are on the edges of the Islamic source material that are there, that some people embrace wholeheartedly, and other people kind of get there's something off and don't practice these things. So Sheikh Yasser Qadhi is somebody who's kind of come out against this and is speaking out against a general problem with men not taking responsibility and leaving a wake of damaged women behind them. And one thing, talking about this video that has come out, the woman speaking was talking about how it's like ruined her life and it's kind of broken her. And these things.
And just to be clear, in the video, it goes more than just like she feels groomed, almost, right? Like that he pursued her and set her up for this, and kind of isolated her and kept her from other prospects, and like kept her kind of like under his thumb.
So this immediately,
before they got married.
So this immediately makes me think of Hagar, actually, from the Bible, who, if you read the biblical account of this was not a good thing.
Right.
Sarah convinced Abraham to take her because she wasn't being able to have any kids. But then when Sarah has her own kids, she's jealous of Hagar and sends her into the wilderness with absolutely nothing. Hagar is a broken woman with a child on the edge of death. But that is where God met Hagar and gave her hope. So if you're a woman listening to this and you've gone through a Misyar marriage or something similar, listen, your life does not have to be over. God loves you. He sees your pain. And perhaps it's in this time that he might reveal himself to you for real in the person of Jesus, because that is where God meets us. He transforms our lives and gives us a bright and beautiful future, which you can still have. Let's talk about the biblical view of marriage, because this is a question we get a lot from Muslims. And generally, what I see is there's this assumption that adultery, zina, fornication are all fine in Christianity. And Islam is the only system that has any kind of rules for this kind of thing.
Wow.
So what are the biblical rules for marriage, guys?
Pretty much the opposite of everything you just said. Like, you're supposed to remain married to one wife, no polygamy. You're not supposed to have sex outside of marriage. Marriage is where it's like the truest expression of God's love between a man and a woman. And that it's holy and that it's sanctified, and that it's something God blesses.
Yeah, and it's a
So,
covenant you make,
right,
right? It's a
covenant, right?
covenant, and
Yeah,
covenant is sacred.
right,
So we like when we look at this picture from Christian's perspective, yes, this is covenant in the eyes of God when men and women unites in one. So the problem, I would address this particular problem, why in a Muslim mindset these lines are so blurred that for them Christians are immoral, adulterous and whatnot. So the line is because
right.
of the liberal culture and because there is no defined boundary, because on the face it doesn't look. So if a person is Christian or if a person is not Christian or not religious, when we think like from Eastern side perspective, I'm talking from there, that when we think of Americans, the majority represent the otherwise, right? So
Right.
so that is the confusion. And a person like me, I consider, even when before coming to the United States, I consider myself an educated person, right? Well-rounded. I know about thing or two, and I was falling into that same trap where I felt like in Christianity has gone so loose
Hmm.
that there are no moral values left. But when I came here and I saw that I found Christians more adhering to the principles than what I found in my own societies. So that was pretty shocking for me.
Hmm. I mean, I think that like it's really interesting because when you look at what's happening in culture, you had mentioned, the idea of liberal culture. There's a definite effort to redefine what marriage is, right? And it's really interesting to me because I mean, Christians, if you're serious about these issues and biblical about these issues, you would look at it and say, like, and I've heard people say this all the time, that Satan is trying to attack the nuclear family, right? Trying to redefine what marriage is. And if you redefine, marriage between a man and a woman, you start making it between a man and a man, and whatever, you can move it wherever you want. And just like God is not a respecter of persons, I don't believe Satan is a respecter of persons either. I don't. I think that he looks at all humanity and he wants to corrupt it wherever it is and however he can. And I kind of look at this and I'm like, this is. I'm not saying that Satan's like trying to attack Islam, but what I am saying is that if he can drive a wedge between a man and a woman loving each other, he can deface the image of God itself, like the union that God wants to have with us as believers. It's not like God has sex with us or anything like that, but there's an intimacy and a closeness he wants to experience. He wants us to experience with him, right? Even in the Bible, it talks about how the church is like the bride of Christ, right? And introducing other things into that is going to just drive wedges, right? It's going to cause division. It's going to cause contempt. Look at what happened with Hagar, right? It's not irredeemable. It's not like something, God can't fix. But once mankind starts to say, well, marriage isn't the way that it's set up. It's the way that I say it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or I'm going to take whatever book that I'm following and I'm going to, listen, the Orthodox do this too. The Orthodox Jews do this too. People don't know this. It's not as like widespread, but during a woman's menstrual cycle, that there are certain sects of Orthodox Judaism that allow men to have essentially a hall pass. They can go sleep with a Gentile, right? They can go sleep with a prostitute because your wife's unclean and it's better than spilling your seed on the ground. So you can go do that. So it's not necessarily a marriage, right? But what does that do? It introduces an element into a marriage that provides a foothold for infidelity, provides a license for infidelity,
Mm-hmm.
right? Starts making it okay. Starts making it okay to treat as a man, treat your wife as like something like to kind of marginalize her into like a sexual act. You know what I'm saying? So I'm kind of looking at this in a different way. If you're going to look at it like maybe supernaturally, you would say this is just part of like Satan's ongoing war against humanity to try and corrupt marriage in all its forms, right? Like, because where else would you see this? Like, what's the difference? And I know that this is going to sound really controversial,
Mm-hmm.
right? But once you introduce a third person into a marriage between a man and a woman, and it doesn't matter if it's like a marriage between two men or a marriage between two women, I'm not saying that that's a marriage either, just to be clear.
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying that once you start messing with the definition, once you start messing with the structure that God laid out, and you start introducing like humanistic elements or overly religious elements, or
Personal tailored choices.
right, you know what I mean? Like, the stuff I was reading about Misyar is like how do we that it's a man has desires, like he has feelings, he has things he needs to express, and it's like, yeah, okay, I got things I want to express too. That doesn't mean I can go out and do whatever I want, right? And if I want to stay close to God as a Christian, like I can't act on every impulse, right? And I certainly should not find some like try to look for some like biblical loophole to try and get what I want, because that's the opposite of having a relationship with God. You're not putting him first there, you're putting yourself
Yeah.
there.
And also related to this is connected to what I was saying earlier. When I came here, I saw a complete different picture, right? I
Right.
come from a place where there is a lot of control. You want to not to, I'm not against certain type of controls. I don't believe in ultimate freedom. Let me be very, very clear here first. But of course, if you have immense amount of control, then there are loopholes always which people will excel on, and they will do things, and that is a moral corruption. You're hiding from the system, you're hiding from the rules. Nobody knows, but you know what you did, right? So that is the problem, that there is so much under the carpet. So much everything put under the carpet. Nobody knows we are good people. We have the moral, righteous values, but no, they are all shallow. Here, I'm not saying all Christians are like that, but the idea which I found fascinating, that the principle is completely different. One operates on love, other operates on control. So when you have this element of love going through, and of course it depends on like how solid of a connection you have with your loving God, right? And that keeps you away from any immorality, right? Not to say that human doesn't have a sin nature and there are no desires. Yes, there are desires, but the love of God is so huge, so big, so humongous that it keeps you away from all those things. And that is what I see most Christians, again, not all Christians, most Christians adhering to the Christian principles and living a righteous life.
Well, at least I would say like it's at least a norm within Christianity, right? So it doesn't say that Christians don't cheat, right? It doesn't say that Christians don't do bad things, or mistreat their wives or whatever. It's certainly part of the like the trials of Christian life to stay faithful in a marriage, particularly like when things are going bad. But the thing that I would add to what you just said is that, the one thing that the Bible does is it points out key stories where there's like a concubine involved, or like there are too many wives involved, right? And the foils of the people involved in it. You know what I'm saying? Like David, for instance, had more wives than he needed, and it eventually, created a sense of entitlement. And then he killed his friend's wife. He slept with his friend's wife, got her pregnant, and then killed her husband to keep up. You know what I mean? To cover it up.
This episode contains spoilers for House of David in season 5.
That's right. So I'm saying that, there are other instances too, right? Like there's a story in the book of Judges where a man takes his concubine, and like the men want to like rape her, and he just throws her out there and leaves her out there, and they rape her to death. And then he gets all mad about it all of a sudden and cuts her up into pieces and sends like pieces. It's a very graphic story, but sends pieces of her all over Israel, right? To rally a army, right? So the point is that the Bible, while it like looks, particularly in the Old Testament, like has instances of polygamy, right, or allowances for polygamy, always points you back to this idea that the human heart is asking for too much all the time.
Yep.
The human heart is always wanting what it can't have. It always wants more. The eyes are never satisfied. It's always sitting here saying, I saw like this one like clip that's running around on social media right now, and it's of a comedian, and God creates Adam and Eve, and Adam looks at Eve and says, and this isn't to denigrate women, I'm just saying this is indicative of a human heart. That's what the story is all about. And he goes, look, we're going to live forever. We can have whatever we want. We're never going to die. We're never going to get old. And, and we're walking with God. And she goes, yeah, but what else? Right. Right.
That's
So
not it,
the
right?
point is it's not Eve, it's us, right? We're always looking at that. We're always saying like there's a part of us that desires more. And what God desires to do, particularly within a marriage, right, is his presence in the middle of a marriage is what satisfies that marriage, right? It's like your heart is satisfied, and then the if the marriage is based on on Jesus, right, like following biblical the Bible, like a biblical marriage, the intention is to say your satisfaction comes from God outside of your marriage, but also within your marriage, right? This is great, like this idea in Judaism where there's like this great tradition. I've seen it in weddings where there's like a threefold cord, right? The Bible says a threefold cord is hard to break. Okay, it's in the book of Ecclesiastes, and there are two like strings, and the third string has a blue string wrapped inside
Right.
of it, right? So the point is that God is supposed to be intertwined within the
Yes.
marriage, right? It's supposed to be in the marriage, and the man and the woman are both connected to God, but still connected to each other. And that, I think, going back to my early statement, is what is trying to be perverted here. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So what I would say is you can look at both. You have to differentiate between first Western culture and Christianity,
Mhm.
which is a differentiation all Muslims know how to make, because the second you see something wrong in a Muslim society, everyone's going to say it's not the religion, it's the culture.
Yes.
Right. And there's truth to that, right? You got to be able to differentiate, and you've got to do that the other way too.
Right.
And then there are Christians who fall short of the standard. That's also true,
Mhm.
but that doesn't change the standard. And God's standard is one man, one woman for life, no divorce unless there's adultery, and that's what the standard is. And people will look at that and they'll say, actually, that's really hard. Who can do that? And the reason it's designed that way is because it's designed for you to need God in your life.
Right.
You actually can't do it unless you
Right.
actually have an active living relationship
Relationship.
with God.
Yep.
It's not based on a list of
Do's and don'ts.
do's and don'ts, right?
Mhm.
That you're able to just kind of like get off on technicality. God's law does not make allowances for your weaknesses. Those are the only allowances
His
it makes.
his grace is there for your
Is
weakness.
exactly right.
Yeah.
His grace, his forgiveness is there for your weaknesses, but it
Right.
never justifies.
But
your,
it never like kowtows to it, right?
Right.
Like it never.
Yeah, and I think before we run out of time, one last question to go over since it's related to marriage, and this is a very common question in Muslim world, and I think we went over it before as well, but just like to touch down on it, that Solomon had concubines, and it's mentioned in the Old Testament. So how you Christians refute that claim that your Old Testament allowed all those things?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So the way Jesus appeals to Genesis is he says God created Adam and Eve, one man, one woman, and joined the two together as one flesh. Two shall become one flesh is how Genesis defines it, and that's how Jesus defines it. And he said from that people should have known that you weren't supposed to divorce your wife. And the way the attitude the New Testament takes is that's how you should know it should be one man, one woman for life. Yes, there is polygamy in the Old Testament, but the way we read about our prophets is not the same way Muslims read about our prophets. It's not a belief that these people are living perfect lives. Sometimes they're a good example, sometimes they're a bad example.
They are humans.
They're humans, right? Polygamy is a bad example and a cautionary tale for us. There is not one positive description of polygamy anywhere in the Bible, especially with King Solomon. King Solomon directly says his many wives were what caused his heart to depart from his God. He himself in the book before his death, Ecclesiastes, he repents of this. And he's the one that says, all streams flow to the sea, but the sea is never full, talking about this endless human desire. And he says, rejoice always in the wife of your youth.
Right.
He tells you to celebrate that monogamy.
Mm.
The Old Testament shows polygamy, but idealizes monogamy. And you see this in Proverbs 31 as well. You see this in the Genesis account. Then in Jesus' time, it's crystal clear that the rule is one man, one woman
Right.
for life.
Right.
And that is the standard. And you have to be a one woman man in order to be a leader of a New Testament church. Why?
Right.
Because monogamy is the standard for Christian behavior. And somebody who's not a monogamist is missing God's standard.
The idea that, I just want to add one thing, the words are one flesh, right? The Hebrew is basar echad, which means one flesh, but the word echad means composite unity. It means unity almost like on a micro or cellular level. Like it's as, unified as, your body is to itself. And it's interesting to me because that is also the word to God describes himself. The Lord is our God. The Lord is one. It's echad, right? One flesh, united together, composite. So it's interesting because like this is a very like you could take the argument of Trinity and apply it to that, right? Like God has composite unity within himself. The Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, they're all connected that way. But then God looks at marriage and says that's what it's supposed to be. Right? Like that composite unity. You're supposed to treat her like you're treating your own flesh, right? You're supposed to love unconditionally. You're supposed to forgive unconditionally. 70 times 7. There's a great teaching out there on 70 times 7. One of these days we'll get to talk about it. But it's this idea that, there's a closeness that God wants to have with us, and it's supposed to be reflected in marriage. And things that get in the way of that are not from God.
Well, guys, thank you for listening to Christ and Caliphate. We'll be back next time.